Okay, hi everybody. This is Dakota Driscoll, Ashlyn Lipnicki, and Selena Yee. We are doing Chapter 6, Professionalism and Ethics in Public Health. So just an overview of what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to go over
In ethics, it's pretty much a study of right and wrong. It's concerned with guidance on how to live life well and to live like a good life. In chapter 6, one of the overarching definitions that we looked at was consequentialism, also known as utilitarianism, where whether an action is right or wrong is dependent on the consequences. So it focuses really on the sum total of the consequences, and not really on like individual actions and how individuals might be harmed. And the challenges to public health with consequentialism and utilitarianism. Public health is often associated with like big picture ideas, how the public will be benefited from certain initiatives, and less about how the individual might be impacted. Um, an alternative view is that the public health focuses on distributing interventions and benefits evenly, justly, and fairly. Uh, so it again less on how the individual is treated, more on how the overall public is treated or helped. So public health officials are accountable to a lot of people, many different stakeholders, different demographics, um, different policymakers, and they can often face ethical tensions, because being accountable for one group might mean uh, not being as accountable for another group. So the so they face challenges of an evolving understanding of the scope of public health and rapid changes in the social and political landscape in which they act. Public health officials need to prevent like transmissions of diseases and infections, while also battling social and economic conditions that they could in any way influence human health. Um, so there are gray areas. There are a lot of gray areas. For example, take vaccinations and quarantine. While many believe that everyone should be vaccinated, that's a personal choice, and it ends up being like a personal choice. And quarantine might step on the individual liberty of certain people, but it's for the benefit of the whole. So there you go.
Okay, so there are two main ethical challenges for public health professionals. The first one is this dual role that we have as government officials and also health professionals. And as Selena mentioned, we really do have obligations to lots of different stakeholders, and this could cause some conflicts in just like overarching goals and the visions of everybody. And then the second one is having this ever evolving social and political landscape. So we really have to make sure that we're changing with the times and being up on the social changes, not just like the scientific and research changes. We also have to make sure that we stay up with this increased focus on the social determinants of health and the non-health factors. And I thought it was really interesting in the textbook how they mentioned about the social determinants of health maybe being too paternalistic. I think this could be a really interesting debate amongst different people in different fields. But basically, there's that question of where does the responsibility lie of public health and caring for the public? But then it's just really important for us to engage and communicate well with stakeholders and other leaders that we're partnering with on these projects. And then we really have to be aware of this knowledge implementation gap, because we can gather all of the knowledge in the world about these health problems, but we really have to make sure that we're implementing them effectively. And we have to be able to justify the decisions we're making for an intervention, and then be able to take that decision to the public and really explain why it's necessary. And there are three approaches to this in ethics. The first one is this professional ethics. So this is more individual and with you in your role as a public health professional. So focusing on honesty and loyalty, being trustworthy, and having the benevolence to do good and help people. And that brings this relationship between the officials and the communities they serve. So we as public health leaders, we must nurture these professional relationships that we have with the people that we're working with. The second one is the organizational ethics. So this is kind of the next step up to the bigger picture, where we can focus on the agency and the organization itself with missions and values, and really making sure that we share common missions and visions with the people that we're working with to more effectively meet these goals. And the example that the textbook gave that we all saw was of the FAB accreditation board and developing that code of ethics. And then the third one is focusing on public policy ethics. So this is really, really big picture, where these actions that we take on the government level for regulations or policies, they really need to be justifiable. And we, again, have to be able to explain this to the public. And I thought it was just an important thing to mention, just to kind of simplify this down, is that the quality of any kind of policy or public health effort is really more important than the quantity of what we do. Okay, so then I'm going to set this up for Ashlyn with the framework for the ethical analysis. In any framework, we have these core values that we want to keep in mind of fairness and equality. We really want to keep that focus on benevolence with minimizing harm. And we want to make sure that we're respecting that individual liberty that Selena talked about a little bit with, we don't want to step on anybody's toes. We want to have trust, accountability, and we want a sense of community. So the goal of this framework is to use questions to provoke deliberation and really have this discussion between all the partners. And then we analyze ethical issues in the situation, and then we use that to evaluate ethical dimensions of the public health options that we have, and then that provides justification for a particular action.
Okay, so the first step in this framework is to analyze the ethical issues in the situation. So here are some important questions that help explore the goals and the context of this decision. So some of the questions: what are the public health risks and harms? What are the public health goals? Who are the stakeholders? And this becomes a little bit clearer when we look at an example. So this case study was in the chapter. And we have, a fast food restaurant with some support from their soda vendor wants to partner with the health department to donate money for a dental clinic in a low-income community. In return, they want their name and the name of the soda printed on any educational materials the health department distributes. Health department officials think this is unethical. Questions that need to be considered surround goals, any conflict of interest, accountability, and values of the two organizations. So some questions that they could ask are the missions and goals of the partners consistent with that of public health agencies? Is there a perceived conflict of interest? To whom and to what are local public health agencies accountable? And there's a few others on the slide. So next, public health agencies need to evaluate the ethical dimensions of the various public health options. This process can lead to social learning around building a consensus and making decisions together. And this can be done by considering things like utility. Does a particular public health action produce a balance of benefits over harms? Other things to consider are justice, respect for individual interest, and respect for legitimate public institutions. And an example of this can be seen in HIV screening. So half of all new HIV infections in the U.S. are among ages 10 to 24, and approximately 50% of those infected have not been tested. Some options include routine testing in doctors' offices or targeted interventions, and ethical deliberations could focus on: does the option of testing only those at high risk produce a balance of benefits over harms? And are these benefits and burdens distributed fairly? Lastly, public health professionals should provide justification for a particular public health action. There are certain justifiable conditions that require public health officials to think about whether a proposed program will realize the public health goal that is sought. These conditions include effectiveness. Is the public health goal likely to be accomplished with this option? They also want to think about proportionality. Will the benefits of the action outweigh the infringed moral considerations? They also want to consider necessity. Is it necessary to override the conflicting ethical claims in order to achieve the public health goal? And they also want to think about least infringement. Is the action the least restrictive and least intrusive? And lastly, like it has been stated before, public justification. Can public health agents offer public justification for the action or policy that citizens find acceptable? Another example includes mandatory screening of donated blood for HIV, which clearly meets all justifiable conditions. Screening is effective and necessary to achieve the goal, while in contrast, mandatory HIV screening programs for all those seeking a marriage license does not meet the justifiable conditions because screening in this case is not necessary or impartial. It's also important to note that ethical considerations can change over time, given the changing values and known evidence of society at the time. We hope this gave you a nice overview of ethics in public health. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.